Hello everybody, welcome back to the Rugby Bunker. Apologies to the podcast listeners for no episode last week. We had a brief break with Charlie being away and just a lot going on with England shuffling their team announcement forward to Tuesday. But we're back this week, reacting a little bit to England Australia, but mainly looking ahead to England against Fiji. Loads of content up on the YouTube channel from the last week, so please check that out. But in this episode, you've got a bit of me and Charlie talking about England's team to face Fiji. Got a bit of myself and Harry Latham-Coyle from The Independent chatting about the other big games this weekend, especially France against South Africa on Saturday night in Paris. Can't wait for that one. And then finally, I had a brief chat with Vereimi Wara from the Fiji Times, just to get a bit of a perspective on how Fiji have developed and built over the last year. So please enjoy. Look out for some reaction videos on Saturday from Twickenham. And yeah, over to me and Charlie. Charlie, I'm sat outside England's hotel. I don't think it's going to rain on me. How are you getting on?
I'm very well. I'm very much inside, but you're braving it, which I fully respect. You've heard firsthand from Ellis Genjan and Steve Borthwick, so it's going to be interesting to mine you on that and another very interesting side that England have picked.
Yeah, I think it is interesting. So some quick updates, because you'll have seen there's no Freddie Stewart. He seems to be tracking okay based on what Borthwick said. I think Freddie Stewart trained fully today, as I open my notebook for effect. Tom Roebuck saw a specialist about his ankle knock, and England are hopeful for him next week. And two other changes, George Ford and Will Stewart, they're just rested, just rotated from what we can tell. So that's quite interesting. And obviously the Roebuck side of it's interesting because classically we bigged him up, didn't we, Charlie, last week after the Australia game. And now sadly he's ruled out.
It did. Underhill too, just rotated out?
It didn't actually come up, but I'm assuming so. And I think the reason being because Borthwick spoke about wanting to essentially speed up this England team a little bit, and especially in the back row. I think having gone for the kicking game and height version of his England team last week against Wallabies, this is more of a faster paced kind of affair, which is why Underhill was popped out, and you've got Earl coming in and cutting himself at number 8 as well.
Well, that's a really sort of interesting rebalancing, isn't it? And England haven't had a jumping 8. I'm trying to think. When was England's last jumping 8? Because they've gone obviously Billy Vunipola, Tom Willis, they've gone Ben Earl. So those guys have dominated the sort of starts. Obviously, Tom Willis coming in fairly late since the Eddie Jones era. And, you've got guys like Nathan Hughes coming in there as well. I'm trying to think of sort of a number 8 in the mould of someone like Toby Faletau, for instance, Kieran Reid, who you can then have a sort of a sort of classical 6 and 7. England have had to sort of think on their feet a bit with that and rebalance the side. And that's sort of coincided with the rise of these hybrid flanker come locks, hasn't it, at 6 with England? And it's just really interesting that Cunningham South gives them that. I think that the point on the rotation is that we have finally, because of the point of where England's depth have got to the stage where we're not talking about being dropped. Oh, goodness, they're axed. George Ford, because I think we're all sort of mindful of the fact that England are in a good enough place whereby they are still sort of adapting lineups to opponents and to tactical plans. And this isn't, they're out on their ear thing. This really is changing the order, to use a term that Eddie Jones used to use, and just bringing in guys who are sort of more suited to how they're going to go, or just in the case of a few maybe selections in this one, just giving guys opportunity and saying, seize that, and you're more in the mix for the sort of for the other games.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Versatility is just the buzzword at the moment. They're obsessed with how players can sort of move around and cover in different positions, clearly sort of fearing some sort of World Cup disaster where multiple players are injured in X positions, and how do we cover that in game? Charlie Cunningham himself really interests me, just from because I don't necessarily know what his best position is. I think he's very handy as kind of second row cover, as we saw in the Wales game in the Six Nations. But also, is he a 6 or is he an 8? I think Steve Borthwick would argue it doesn't matter. It's just about how he delivers when he plays in whichever position he comes on in or he starts in. But at the same time, like number 8 is kind of a bit of a question mark, and I don't necessarily think even a player of the match barnstorming performance against Fiji would necessarily change England's long-term plan for him. But it is interesting. I just feel like it's an open position. And what does he bring? He's physical in the tackle. He's really physical in the carry. And that's definitely what we need, was an exact line from Borthwick today. So I don't know. Maybe he hits it off and maybe he's a long-term addition. I wanted to chat about the backline composition because I get the impression that Tom Roebuck, if he doesn't knock his ankle in training, still starts. And therefore, even though Ollie Lawrence, by all accounts, has trained the house down and was desperate to come back in, and even though you could see the merits of having Lawrence back in for the Fiji game, we think it want to up the tempo a little bit. I just think, backing up what we said last week, Roebuck just seems to have really won over the coaching staff and especially Borthwick with what he has been producing in training and in an England shirt. And I think that's really interesting, that say that he is fine for next week against the All Blacks and all goes well with his ankle. He's basically been deloading this week was the expression, to then reload to go into next week. I don't know. I could see him coming back.
All the loading. Yeah, I can. I certainly can. And I think if we sort of just flit across to the side, there's a really intriguing selection, isn't there, in the Scotland side, which is Carl Steyn coming in for Duhan van der Merwe in what looks like a really explicit signpost that Scotland are going to go after the All Blacks in the air. I think given the change that Argentina got in that home game against New Zealand, I think that will be the second home game, the game that Argentina won against the All Blacks this rugby championship. They just dominated the air, and I can see Roebuck being a really big weapon for that. The interesting thing is what they would have done, I guess, with the centre partnership had Roebuck been around. But I tend to think that they would have kept Freeman at 13 just because they want to get minutes into him there. Surely they'll want to get minutes into him there. I thought he was largely on a second watch. I thought he was really, really impressive, particularly in defence. Freeman, this is, and previously he has spoken himself about not necessarily being frustrated, but wanting to avoid flitting between one position and go between two positions sort of every week. So I think in an ideal world he would have stayed at 13, but it's a hell of an option. That is atmospheric. Being able to switch a line starter back into the position that he started those lines tests in. That's another sort of thing that speaks to the relative strength that England have found themselves in, or the strong position they found themselves in. Sorry.
Final thing that I wanted to chat about that Borthwick said, Charlie, was just on Tom Curry, because he was asked about, how are you managing Tom Curry? He must be desperate to start, he must be desperate to play. And Borthwick's just spoken about, I think we know how important Tom Curry is to England, and certainly how important he was to the Lions over the summer. But Borthwick brought up that he'd been showing the whole squad 2 clips of Curry from the Australia game. One was naturally Curry melting Tane Edmed, which we thoroughly enjoyed, didn't we? And the second one was just an example of Curry's off the ball work. And actually he went on this couple of minutes just talking about how hard it is to kind of show how important off the ball work is and who does it really well. Like, it takes them literally reviewing tape and like tracking GPS numbers. I think it just underlined for me how high Curry is held in regard by this England team. And also Borthwick brought up, for all the baseball fans out there, crossover fans with the Rugby Bunker, moment from the World Series Game 7 where the Blue Jays went for a home run to potentially win it, and just it was 10 centimetres short of a home run, and how those are the margins, and now England are working to close those margins. So yeah, I found that quite interesting.
Rewind back to the mix zone after the Australia game. Luke Cowan-Dickie was the reverence with which he spoke about Tom Curry was really interesting to me. There you've got 2 guys who have been on 2 Lions tours each, and still Cowan-Dickie, who's older and sort of more established, although he's only just got to 50 caps, and Curry's a little way past that, I think, now on early 60s or so. But Cowan-Dickie speaking about Tom Curry as though, almost just absolutely taking as read that he is one of the best players in the world. And I don't know whether, I think some people are very high on Tom Curry, some people probably less high on him, and he absolutely doesn't care about any of that. He doesn't care about how he's sort of rated externally. He's very sort of driven, he's got a very tight sort of family network, support network. But I do think he's getting better and better, actually. And I think that'd be expected as you sort of learn about your body as an athlete and learn about your craft around the breakdown and things like that. I don't know whether, as Steve Borthwick mentioned this today, but that final stand that England made to keep Australia at 7 points with 13 players on the pitch, the very last play was Tom Curry getting underneath Fraser McWright when Fraser McWright sort of picked and went against the grain, which was pretty sharp work from McWright, but Curry was sort of wise to it. And he just really sort of raised those standards. I'm really wary as to sort of another point off this, really wary of making drawing more parallels between England and the Boxers setups and between Borthwick and Erasmus. But that rotation and being able to sort of supercharge your bench with super experienced players now, as England are doing with Curry and Itoje, and have done sort of the previous week with their Lions front rowers, that can only be healthy because that empowers the starters to get the opportunities, and it almost ensures, you never quite ensure it, but you get such a good chance of being able to finish games strong. And I think that's just so important.
It speaks to how settled England are. I forgot to mention from the start that the reason Maro Itoje isn't starting is because he had a small knock following the Australia game, which is why Ellis Genge is captain and is why Alex Coles is starting with Ollie Chesham. The reason being that England just wanted to keep the same lock combination starting throughout the week, and that's why Itoje is on the bench for the first time for England since Australia 2017, Charlie, when England won 30 points to 6. If you can name, before I let you go, if you can name the starting second rows that day and the blindside flanker who started ahead of Itoje, I will be very impressed. So November 2017.
Colsey, I've seen your tweet. Should we leave it? Should we leave it open?
This is like when you ruin Name That Player. It's just really sad.
But it was a good. So Launchbury, Laws, Locks, Rob Shaw 6. Yeah.
There's just no like intrigue or jeopardy with this podcast.
No.
It's just you spoiling. But you've got to be honest every time.
Got to be honest. If you've seen something, got to come clean. But that's an interesting way of balancing it, right? Because you've got the bopper in Launchbury. You've got the lighter guy who I know he flitted between Lock and 6, and maybe is still doing for Breathe, but became almost exclusively a second row in Laws, and then Rob Shaw, who sort of became that auxiliary line-out option to sort of help balance things with him and Haskell and whoever else was with Vunipola. So it's interesting that these principles don't change, although I think Borthwick is using his coaching nous and where he's very strong at coaching in order to, I think, it would be really interesting to see the amount of back row forwards that from Cunningham South to Ben Curry to Tom Curry to Guy Pepper last week, who are being sort of upskilled in the line-out jumping stakes by Steve Borthwick so he can make these back row combinations work. That has certainly been, even Sam Underhill, but he's been doing a bit of sort of surprise jumping for England, and that really sort of speaks to the pace I think that Borthwick is trying to get into teams.
Charlie, you've got to go. Very finally, just look out for Henry Arundel, probably getting half an hour off the bench. Apparently Borthwick said that he had one run in training where he was so fast that he got through a bit of space that Borthwick just didn't even realise was there. So I can imagine Arundel coming off the bench, causing a bit of chaos. Charlie, I'll see you on Saturday at Allianz Stadium, and maybe we'll do a bit of reaction again. But yeah, thanks, mate.
Catch you then, pal. Catch you then.
Right, everybody, that was me and Charlie having a chat about England's team selection. And it's Harry Latham-Coyle from The Independent. Let's break down a couple of other details ahead of the weekend. So we both confessed that we had essentially forgotten about Ireland's game against Japan. So I don't think we need to touch on that beyond saying that Ireland will be okay and they will bounce back.
One would presume. I think it would indicate bigger problems for Ireland if they are beaten by Japan. But no, it's a big game for Ireland to just rebuild a bit of momentum after that defeat in Chicago last week, and sterner tests to come, of course, with South Africa and Australia later this autumn. But yeah, not expecting a Japanese upset in Dublin.
Yeah, fair. Should we say France, South Africa for last? Should we talk
a
bit about Scotland, New Zealand? So when New Zealand rolled out their team this morning, I texted Charlie and said, I think that team looks beatable. And he said, yes. Now, obviously, there's the caveat of Scotland have never beaten New Zealand. So we have to kind of take that into serious consideration. But what do you think? How do you see it panning out?
Yeah, I would agree that All Blacks team looks beatable in a way that other All Blacks teams going to Murrayfield haven't. But Scotland have had this weird recent record against New Zealand where they don't play them often, but they've tended to play them quite close when they have. So you can understand why that confidence is built. I also then saw the Scotland team and thought, and they've had 3 major injuries: Zander Fagerson, Duhan van der Merwe, Jamie Ritchie, none of them playing. And you just feel where a nation like New Zealand can absorb the injuries they've got and still put out a very, very good side. I just worry about Scotland's depth still in certain key positions. And it's a very strong team. Having Finn Russell back, having Ben White back in the halves makes a huge difference to that side. I really like they backed the form that Rory Hutchinson has had at Northampton. He's obviously familiar with Lee Radford, their new defence coach from Northampton, and should slot straight into that defensive system. But then that pack still, I worry about it. I worry about the power that New Zealand brought off the bench last week in Chicago. I worry about whether Scotland will be able to stay the course in the forwards particularly. And I understand the Scottish optimism. I understand how great it would be for them to beat the All Blacks, but it's still a really tough ask.
Can I put it out there? I actually don't think that Van der Merwe being out and Kyle Steyn coming in is that bad for Scotland. I feel like with Kyle Steyn, you get an incredibly reliable winger who's good at every single area, who's always kind of delivered for Scotland.
He's a really good leader as well.
He's been called a massive leadership figure with his captaincy experience. So I'm less concerned about that. I agree with you, though, on the other areas. And Rory Dyche being on the bench, you would love to see him start, and I'm sure he will play a massive role when he does come on. A 6-2 split. I just wonder if they're ever going to do it. This is such a good chance because of the All Blacks injuries that they've got with the Barretts being out. Not Bowden. Bowden's still there. Bowden on track for cap number, 280 or whatever it is. Like he's on an absolutely ridiculous tear.
It is incredible how long he's been out.
Sneaky as well. Like, no, I feel like we don't talk about it, but he's also going to break the record.
Yeah, he's also. I might write a piece on this next week with the All Blacks playing England. He's also closing in on the New Zealand try record, which is one of those weird records, which isn't as many tries as you think, because we're seeing this a bit with Rieko Ioane at the moment, who's again just short of that record. A lot of their wingers get to sort of 45 tries and then find themselves out of the team because. The All Blacks always seem to have new wing threats. And Beauden Barrett, Will Jordan, and Rieko Ioane are all within sort of sniffing distance of that record. So
you're right.
That might be one we might see some movement on that front this weekend, I guess, with Jordan in the side.
We're banging about Will Jordan going for it and how he's the most likely. But no, you're right. Bodie's right in the mix. Anything else in this game that sort of intrigues? I think we've said it enough times. This is such a good opportunity for Scotland, and if the All Blacks were to win by 7-8 points, it wouldn't shock me because that tends to be how these things play out. But a massive opportunity. Should we chat about Wales-Argentina briefly? If I just look for these teams, because I can't tell if they've been announced yet at the time, because we've been engrossed chatting to Steve Borthwick while we've been here.
It's a Sunday game.
Exactly. That's because they've still.
Yeah, we are in this age where we thought England might name on Monday this week, which would have been very confusing in terms of getting our schedules together and such. But,
that's shifted around, as Charlie and I touched on just now. I think Maro Toje's knock and them waiting to see about Tom Roebuck and Freddie Stewart obviously meant that instead of getting the team that we were expecting from them a little bit earlier, we didn't get it. All I can see from the Argentina side is that it's now Tetis Chavarro's birthday. So happy birthday to him and best wishes to him. We've emphasised this with other guests on the episodes, how Argentina is a game that Wales could win or they could get completely blown out. And I think we're waiting eagerly to see who's at fly half. Does Lewis Rees-Zammit make it? I'm kind of pushing hard for an Ollie Cracknell start at number 8. I feel like he would really give Wales a bit of grit and a lot and extra breakdown kind of threat to go with Jack Morgan. But I feel like he's the kind of like horrible hard yards kind of player that they would need. How do you see it going in Cardiff?
Yeah, I think that number 8 position, or whether it's number 6 with Aaron Wainwright, has that versatility. I mean, Morgan Morse is someone probably with a higher ceiling than Cracknell. Cracknell has been so consistent for Leicester, and probably he would have been signed by Leicester. He's obviously a quality performer for a number of years, but I don't think Leicester would have signed him expecting him to take on the role he's had. And he's just delivered time after time. He's had some injury issues last season. I think he missed a big chunk, but I think you're right. He's one of those players that Wales almost need to do a bit of the grunt work, get them over the gain line, be those high volume carriers that they've probably missed a bit. Wainwright's had to do quite a lot of that. Neither of their locks, Jenkins or Beard, are big carriers. We'll see how they use Reece Carey. I suspect he'll come off the bench with Nicky Smith starting. So you're right. Someone like Cracknell could be a really, really important figure for them, particularly in a game that you're right. If Argentina play their best, I think Wales will really struggle to live with them. But we know the Pumas have a bad performance in them. We've seen that in the Rugby Championship, where they can go from world beaters one week to looking a bit of a shambles the next. Wales will be very much hoping that they get them on a bad day. And I'm really excited to see how Steve Tandy sculpts that side.
Yeah, it almost feels like the hardest game to predict of the weekend, even though obviously Wales are in coming off a pretty terrible year. I would just love, as we've said previously, let's just see some building blocks from Wales. Let's just see some foundations in defence, the kicking game, with selection as well. Just signs that things are trending. It doesn't necessarily have to be the results. Harry, before I let you disappear, France against South Africa late on Saturday night. We were joking about this just now. I imagine that we will be in the middle of an England or Fiji press conference by the time that we get to about half time of that game, given the tight kickoff time to England's game against Fiji at Allianz Stadium. Big talking point is the French front row. They kind of followed England's lead from last week by potentially naming their reserve front row as the starters. So you've got 4 caps between your 2 starting props against Thomas du Toit on the tight of South Africa and Bowen Venter on the loose head. I find that very interesting, but I don't hate it, in that I quite like the idea of growing Adighieri to come on 50, 60 minutes.
It feels a strange week to be blooding a new propping partnership. I know Adosio and Montagna went pretty well down in New Zealand, but this is Montagna's first start. He came off the bench in those 2 tests he played against the All Blacks earlier in the year. Everything I hear about him, everything that Sage scrum heads say about him, they're very impressed by him.
Talk to me about your Sage scrum.
People in the game who know their front row play. I don't think it's giving away too much to suggest that I'm not a former prop, so I rely on others to
let the viewers and listeners be the judge of that, Harry, but as you were.
I let others guide me on this, but yeah, I think Regis Montagna looks a really good talent. It helps that South Africa don't have Oxenshea. Bowen Venter's a very, very good player, and clearly someone that South Africa are keen to put time in, but you just worry if that removes some of their scrum potency, and France are maybe hoping that then they can go to their more experienced players in the second half and diffuse some of that bomb squad threat. You're right, it's a fascinating selection, and a fascinating French selection all round in a lot of ways. I really like Michael Guillard at number 8. He was very good at lock, obviously, in the Six Nations, and then moved to number 8 on that tour to New Zealand and impressed. But this feels another big challenge for him. He's obviously got the stature, the physicality, the carrying. He offers a little bit of the line out as well. But yeah, it'll be really interesting to see how he goes against a very experienced South African back row and pack in general.
It's a really good South Africa side. I was going to say, Sia Khaleesi's 100th cap, which is a phenomenal achievement. I've got to talk about this Rassie kind of mind games tweet. I love the Rassie mind games. I think they're brilliant. This is not a case of where you can pat him on the back for leaking the French side before France.
Yeah, reading L'Équipe doesn't feel like mind games to me.
I appreciate that not everybody in South Africa or necessarily around the world is keeping tabs with all the French newspapers and outlets, and so I understand why it might seem like that. But the team's been out there for days. Like Rassie's had better mind games than this.
I feel like we sometimes go inside the industry a little bit too much on this podcast. But, one of the reasons that the French journalists tend to know their team is because they get to see pretty much every training session. They get to see, we are very restricted with England. We only see a portion of one training session a week, basically. In France, it's a slightly different model. They're less precious about team news details, and generally it is
the white bibs, right? The white bibs that you give away.
So it's out in the press. I completely understand. It may be that Rassie hasn't seen this and he genuinely has guessed the French team.
I'm not buying it.
In which case, it's fascinating. Well done to Rassie. I mean,
that is phenomenal benefit of the doubt from you. But I get the point that Rassie is making with that tweet, which is that look, he's trying to emphasise just how large this French side is, and look, Miafi on his own is the size of like almost 2 players. Yeah. So I get it.
One of my scariest moments in life, I think, was in Cardiff in the Principality Stadium, the players come down some steps as they're exiting the building, and I saw Roman Taufi-Fanua and Emmanuel Miafu and I think Sebastian Taufi-Fanua coming down together. That's a lot of human beings.
Were you worried for the steps? Is that what you're saying?
I was worried for my safety.
Are you right? Okay. I thought you were worried about the actual steps.
I mean, given how other things have operated in Welsh rugby, I don't. Maybe doubting the structural integrity of the steps is the next.
Don't kick them when they're down.
Next stage.
Listen, it's the game of the autumn comfortably. It might arguably be the game of the year. Actually, now I think about it, outside of those South African New Zealand games, very tight to cool. I think you will see France maybe kick a lot more, and actually you'll probably see South Africa play with a bit more width, which is a total flip on what we're kind of used to from these teams.
And some lovely narratives carrying over from that quarterfinal. And I think of any game that underlines how top tests is decided on such fine margins. You think of that half intercept on his own line, which was ruled backwards. You think of the charge down conversion. I think it just showed that in those top tests at the top elite level between the best nation in the world, it can come down to something as small as the legality of a knock-on or a charge down conversion.
Yeah, I'll never forget the L'Équipe front page the next day, basically saying that I think à pleurer it said, so to cry, like the whole nation was weeping. Yeah. It was comfortably the best. That first half was the best half of rugby I think I've seen. Cannot wait for it. Harry, what a pleasure. Thank you for jumping on.
Pleasure.
Okay, delighted to be joined by Vereimi Wara of the Fiji Times. I hope you're well, sir. I just wanted to get your perspective on the Fiji team to face England this weekend.
Thank you, Ben, for having me. I'm Bulbenaka from Fiji. Just a couple of hours ago, head coach Mick Byrne announced the match day 23 that would be facing England Sunday here and Saturday on your end. So as we're seeing, there's a lot of depth in the team that has been selected. We're seeing a lot of changes as well that have been made, and I guess it's also an indication of just some of the things that Coach Mick Byrne and the coaching staff are wanting to try out as we lead up to the test against England on Sunday.
The win over England in 2023 was such an important result for Fiji rugby. Just tell me about your memories of that day.
I was still a university student at the time, and around the time that match had happened and noting Fiji's progress in the World Cup that year, most of us were actually backing the team because we had actually seen how the team had risen to such an unprecedented height, along with the infusion of players from Europe and players from the then fledgling Fijian Raw team, and seeing how that combination had all played well out coming up to that stage in the match, and seeing how the performance was quite a thrilling one. And it really was also an indication of just where the progress of the team would be heading in the later years, as we're seeing now, and just how all those pathways that had played a critical part in their development really paid off for them. And I think the result in that match against England was an indication as well to the wider rugby world of how much growth and depth had begun to be inculcated in the team. And yes, we saw that there as it happened on the field.
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen Fiji pick up a number of good wins in recent years. That England win, the win over Australia at the World Cup, beating Scotland this summer as well in Suva. Why do you think things are going well for the team at the moment?
To answer that question, I probably would have to think back to a press conference that the media had with head coach Mick Byrne in Newcastle, Australia, where he had mentioned how in some respects it's the new players that have come in, the younger ones, because when I'd asked him the question of how players such as Salisi Rayasi and what inclusion would mean, he had said it meant the infusion of new energy through those players. And not only that, I think it's also the prospect of the team's growth in how they have this stock of players in various positions that are able to feed in and step in where other players who may have had injuries or probably had setbacks have fallen out. So I think the ready-made availability of these players in these positions have really helped in fine-tuning the team and getting them onto higher platforms and achieving results that are quite formidable. Just this in July, we saw that narrow points margin against Australia in Newcastle. And I think it's an indication of just this marriage of rugby pathways and more concentration into training regimens and programs, and also just the wider support from the public on the progress of the team and where the Flying Fijians, not just as a team, as a brand, as a movement, is progressing forward into the future as we lead up into the test on Sunday and eventually the Nations Cup, and in 2 years' time, the Rugby World Cup in Australia.
Thanks, everybody. Just a quick plea to please like, share and subscribe if you can. It does wonders for the channel. We're seeing our numbers go up loads on YouTube, which is very, very exciting. But we're also on TikTok and Instagram now as well. Please give us a follow there for all of our content. Lots more to come during a busy autumn. It's the All Blacks next week. Cannot wait to see how that goes. But yeah, see you then.